So it's been a couple of weeks since we had the last update on the Frogwatch series. That's mainly been because there hasn't really been anything to update you on. The tadpoles didn't go through any kind of changes or anything worth noting. They grew a little bit bigger, but that was about it. But now there is some things to tell you about. They have started to grow their back legs, so they're moving on to the next stage of their development, and we'll talk about that in a bit, and I'll show you that a bit closer up. But also, you guys have been asking me some questions, and I've got them here, and I'll be answering them for you a little bit later on as well. So make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to keep up to date with the series. Well, thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Frogwatch. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that some of the tadpoles are now getting their back legs. Not very many, just a couple in each tank, but the others should follow within the next few weeks. Now when the tadpoles get to this stage, their diet will start to change, and so you'll need to start adapting how you look after them. Now up until this point I've been feeding them spinach leaves, so they will eat a herbivorous diet, so algae is the main thing that they eat, which you can see growing in the tanks and on the stones now. So we'll leave that, but they will also eat the spinach leaves as a supplementary food. Now when the tadpoles start getting their back legs, their diet will change from a herbivorous diet to a carnivorous diet. So you'll need to start giving them some more meaty protein. Now what I've given them in here is bloodworm, which I've been able to get from the local pet shop. It's in the normal fish food supply department. There's various other things you can feed them, things like brine shrimp is one that I've used previously. Also possibly a slightly cheaper alternative you can get from your supermarket is just some plain white fish. Obviously no coatings, no batter, no sauces or anything like that, just plain white fish fillets you can get, and all you need to do is just take a small piece, boil it up for a little while and just pop it in and they'll eat that. So that's what I have been doing the last few years, but I thought I would try them on some bloodworm this time. So over the next few weeks, the tadpoles that haven't started developing should start to begin growing their back legs, and in another 3-4 weeks time we may see the bigger ones that have started to develop already. They may start getting their front legs and will begin to emerge in the water. So there's still plenty of time left as tadpoles before they start turning into little frogs. But that will start happening now, and depending on certain conditions, which I'll talk about later on, that can happen fairly slowly or it can happen really quickly. But what we'll be needing to do soon is to transfer all the tadpoles into one tank and get the second tank ready for when they turn into frogs, because I don't do a half and half setup anymore, where some people can have it so we have half the tank is under the water and then you have like a sloped beach, and on the other half of the tank we'll have like a land area where the tadpoles can then emerge whenever they do start to change. These tanks are a little bit too small for that kind of setup. I have tried it in the past. It's not that successful. Even when I had a much bigger tank and I tried it a few years ago, I was finding that even though the tadpoles could get out of the water easy anytime they wanted to, so when they turned into frogs, some of them were still drowning in the water, so it was a bit unfortunate, which is why I've now switched over the last few years into doing 2 separate tanks, one for tadpoles, one for frogs. So that will be coming up in a future episode once these tadpoles are a lot further along developed and starting to become out of the water. So anyway, from now I have some questions that you guys have sent me, so let's get on to those. Right, so recently I reached out and I asked people to send me some questions, frog related or amphibian related questions that I can answer for you in this video, and quite a lot of you did. You sent me some questions. People reached out to me on Twitter, over my Discord channel, and on the YouTube comments as well. So make sure you check out those if you want to perhaps take part in a future question and answer video. But I've got some questions and my prepared answers here as well. So we'll start off with an introductory question from Welcoming Wildlife on YouTube, who asked, do you collect spawn raised into young frogs and release them? If so, what are your reasons and where do you collect them from, release them to? Sorry if you've already answered these things, I've only just found your channel. First of all, welcome to the channel, really glad to have you here. So yes, this is the basic concept of this entire Frogwatch series. So at the beginning of the breeding season, around sort of March, April time, depending on the conditions of the year, I will collect some frog spawn from a local pond called Vinegar Pond, and I'll take spawn home, put it up into these tanks, and we'll document the changes all the way through to when they are sort of young frogs, when I release them in the summer. Normally, what would it be, July time, I think I normally release them. And we sort of document their life changes throughout the series. That's the entire point of this series. So it's a local pond called Vinegar Pond, which I collect them from, and I always release them back to that pond as well. It's very important to release them back to the same pond that you get them from, if at all possible. So one of my reasons for doing this, well, basically, the whole process is just so fascinating to me. The fact that they go through multiple different stages of life, from spawn to early tadpoles, they grow back legs, then they grow front legs. Their diet changes from herbivore to carnivore to then hunter, or more like an ambush predator, really. And you can kind of follow along with each of these stages, and that care changes. And it's just a really fascinating process. And when I'm interested in something, I want to tell other people about it. That's the whole point of my entire YouTube channel, really, and why I make these videos, is because if I find something interesting, I want someone to tell. I want to share this interest. And that's kind of the basis for it, really. So anyway, thank you for your question. Next one is from UK Amphibians on Twitter, and Connor Carr from YouTube also asked the same question. How long have you been looking after frogs? This is the fifth series on YouTube, so this is the fifth year that I've been doing it. But I also did it a year before as well, that I didn't before I started doing the YouTube Frogwatch series. So this is now the sixth year in a row that I've been looking after them. Connor also wants to know what's been the most memorable moment. There's been a few really interesting moments from these series. I think it was the last Frogwatch episode I did a few weeks back. I did a kind of a best of 2017, and during that year there was some really interesting things that we saw in the tank. There was like tubifex worms. There were damselfly nymphs in there. What else was there? There was a woodlouse. I caught a really interesting thing with a water louse. Laying eggs in the brew pouch on their chest. You could actually watch it in the process of laying eggs. That was fascinating. That was a really interesting series. But more recently, I think it was a couple of years ago, I went down to the pond where I collected these guys from, and there were hundreds and hundreds of frogs absolutely everywhere. You have to be really careful where you were walking, so you wouldn't stand on any. There were so many about. That was a really memorable moment. If I can find, I think I should be able to find the clip, so I might put it in here so you can see that if you missed it a few years ago.
As we approached the pond, we were met with an incredible sight. Hundreds of frogs were sitting in amongst the spawn and calling and croaking. The weather today is much warmer than it was last week, and the frogs have come out to enjoy the warmth. It wasn't just in the water that we could see the frogs. All around the pond, the adult frogs were hopping from out of the bushes and making their way over to the pond to join up with the others. You have to be very careful where you stepped, as there were so many, you had to be careful not to stand on one.
Okay, next up we have Tea Time Science, at Tea Time Science on Twitter, asks, are there different species I might see around Norfolk? Now, while they're asking that particular question, if you weren't aware, I live in the city of Norwich, which is in the county of Norfolk on the sort of east side of England. And Tea Time Science is a science Twitter page, also based in the local area as well. So they're particularly interested in my local area. There's some interesting things actually. So in Norfolk specifically, you should be able to find almost all of the UK native species. So that's the common frog, common toad, and the common or smooth newt. That'd be pretty common, as the name suggests. But also harder to find is the great crested newt, which can be found all over the UK, but its distribution is fairly patchy. But they are a protected species. The habitat is under threat, so they are in decline or rarer, even though they are sort of widespread. They're individually placed. So they are protected species. You have to be really careful about those. Also under threat from habitat loss is the coastal natterjack toad. Now these are only found in a few places in England and Scotland, but Norfolk, where I am, is one of the places that you can find them. There used to be quite a large population of them in the East Anglia region, which is where Norfolk is, but the population has decreased a lot now, but Norfolk is still one of the places where you can find them. Also, we have the northern pool frog as another sort of very rare protected species. was actually thought to be extinct in the UK in the 1990s, but I believe around 10 years later or so they reintroduced some into a single site in Norfolk. So we are one of the only places in the entire country where you can actually find the pool frog. I think there are some other introductions in some other places, but they were unofficial introductions. The only official place that they were actually placed and protected was a single site in Norfolk. They've since expanded a range, so they can be found throughout Norfolk, I think. I've never actually seen one. That's something I really would like to do at some point in the future. The only native species that you're unlikely to find is the palmate newt. Though there have been some reports of sightings around the area, they do look very similar to the smooth newt, so it's possible that the IDs might have been muddled up, or maybe there are some around. It's a bit difficult to tell. I don't really know for sure. There are also, what else did I write down here? There's some non-native frogs that you might be able to find. These are ones that have escaped from a pet trade, or someone has them as a pet and they've either released them deliberately or they've escaped. You might find individual frogs about, probably very, very rare. But the only ones that I've heard about is the midwife toad, which can be found in Sheringham, which is a coastal town in Norfolk. I believe there is a population, breeding population of them there, I think. But anyway, yes, thank you for your question, T-Tom Science. So next up we have Just Charlie 33 from YouTube, who asks, how do you keep your tank so clean? What's quite interesting actually, you might be able to tell, this tank here is a lot dirtier than this one. There's actually quite a bit of algae growing onto the sides of the tank, and the stones are beginning to get quite green because a lot of algae is growing on there. This tank is doing the same thing, but nowhere near as much, because if you've been following along with the series, this tank was set up a couple of weeks after this one. But to be honest with you, I don't really do much to keep it clean. I will occasionally do a water change, which I did show a few episodes ago, where we'll remove some of the water and replace it with fresh, and that's really all I do. One thing I think that keeps the tank so clean is, one thing, tadpoles will eat algae, so they do keep it under control to a certain extent. As you can see, the longer you have it, the dirtier it will get. But also the plants are real live plants, and they can actually really help to keep water clean because they take up the nutrients for their own growth. And so they do actually actively help clean the water. In previous years, I've done things like put pond snails in the tanks, which will also eat the algae. They can keep things clean. But another benefit to keeping tadpoles rather than say fish. Fish you could be keeping for years in the same tank, so you can have to clean the tank to keep it clean. Sometimes you might take everything out, take the fish out, rinse out all the stones, completely empty the tank, clean everything up, put everything back. I never do that with the tadpoles because we're only going to keep them for a few months. Within the next few weeks, when these guys start getting their front legs and wanting to come out of the water, I will obviously completely empty one of these tanks and set that up for the frogs once they leave the water, and all the tadpoles will just be in the one tank. And then once the frogs are released, you're emptying everything. They're all gone, and you can just clean the whole tank and you use them again next year. So I only ever clean them out fully once a year, once they're gone. So I believe it's the live plants that really make a difference, and the fact that you're not keeping them for years with dirt building up over years. So that's that. Well, thank you for your question. Okay, next up we have Liz Wolf from my Discord server. Asks, how long does it typically take for tadpoles to start growing legs? That takes sort of between 6 to 9 weeks. It takes around 4 weeks to fully metamorphose. I've had these tadpoles for about 9 weeks, so they're definitely taking their time, but they are kind of within the normal kind of time range. They've only just now in the last week or so begun to show legs, and there's only 2 or 3 that are actually showing legs. They're definitely taking their time, but it's still within the normal time frame. But that does lead me on to the next question, which is again from T-Tom Science, who asked a lot of questions, but he asked some really good ones, so we're going to answer as many of them as we can. Are there ways to speed up or slow down frog developments? So several things can influence how fast the tadpoles will grow and develop. Anything from the food they eat, the temperature of the water, up to a certain point. Obviously, if it gets too warm, then that will begin to slow them down again as well. I haven't seen any studies about specific temperatures, but they're bound to be out there, and I reckon that'll be pretty interesting reading. The water level can influence the growth as well. I've heard that a lower water level can promote a faster growth, and that's probably because it's a natural response to like a pond drying up. So if a pond begins to dry up, the water level is dropping, then it becomes a benefit to be able to metamorphose into a frog and to leave the water before the pond dries up and you end up dying because you can't survive without the water. So it's sort of a natural response to the lower water level. More frequent water changes will also promote faster growth. I believe I've mentioned this in the previous episode that the larger tadpoles will release a hormone into the water which inhibits the growth of the other tadpoles. So changing the water will minimise the tadpole's contact with this hormone and prevent or minimise the effect that hormone will have. The thyroid gland in tadpoles controls metamorphosis, and iodine is an important chemical in that process. So if the water is iodine deficient, that can slow down or even prevent the metamorphosis completely. But I've actually read that tadpoles who were fed thyroid tissue, sort of mammalian thyroid tissue was fed to the tadpoles, and they actually changed a lot quicker because obviously it contained those kind of chemicals. And also on that note, a friend of mine, Liam from the YouTube channel I Shot of Wildlife, who you may have seen on this channel previously, and we've done some videos together, he collected some tadpoles about a week before I collected these ones, and his changed incredibly fast. I think within a few weeks they were frogs, and he released them. And this was probably months ago, and mine are still obviously tadpoles. But he found out that it was because he was feeding his tadpoles cat biscuits, which contained iodine. So it's something to do with the cat's diet. But the iodine is the chemical which the tadpoles will use to create the hormone that makes them change into frogs. So that was really interesting. I bet loads of scientific studies have been done on the area, and that's probably a really interesting thing to read up on. Okay, next one. El Conrad from YouTube says, hello, I'm from Iowa and I have a pond in my backyard. About a week ago, my brother and I were practically tripping over toads mating everywhere within the pond. They've all since left, but I know the water is thick. But now the water is thick with tadpoles. Could these be toad tadpoles after only a week? We also have bullfrogs and pickle frogs. Will they eat the tadpoles? Love the channel. Thank you very much. So I'm not too familiar with species other than European common frog because these are the only ones that I've looked after. So things like bullfrogs and pickle frogs and whatever species of toad you had in your pond, I'm not entirely sure about. But a week, it is quick, but not unheard of. Again, the speed at which spawn will hatch is the same kind of factors as how fast they develop. So like temperature plays a good part in that. So if it's really warm, it can speed things up. I know that when I've collected spawn and put them in the tank, they generally start hatching within days of putting in there. And it's not really possible to tell how long the spawn's been in the pond before I've collected them, but they normally look fairly fresh, so probably within a few days. So a week normally takes I think it's about 3 weeks. It's about 3 weeks for spawn to hatch typically, but a week is quick, but probably not unheard of. So it probably is your toad tadpoles. So bullfrogs and pickle frogs, again, I'm not familiar with them as much, but from what I understand, frogs will hunt on land. I don't believe frogs will hunt underwater. Some species, there might be more aquatic frogs, will probably hunt underwater, but certainly these species of frogs will hunt on land away from the pond. So your tadpoles will be safe from those, I should think. There'll be loads of things that will want to eat your tadpoles. If you have fish or dragonfly, damselfly nymphs, or larvae will attack them. Certain water beetles will, birds, hedgehogs, foxes, whatever kind of wildlife you have in Iowa. A lot of things will want to eat them, but the bullfrogs and pickle frogs, they won't, I don't think. But thank you very much for your question. Krieger from Discord channel asks, how do frogs throw up? Wasn't it like throwing out their stomach? Yes, you're absolutely right. That's a really interesting question actually. It's called full gastric aversion. So frogs, they can't vomit. It's just that they're not capable of it. So what they will do is called full gastric aversion, where they basically turn that entire stomach inside out and throw that entire stomach out of their mouth. They will then scrape off whatever's inside it with their feet and then stick it all back inside. So that sounds pretty disgusting, but it's a way that they can get rid of anything that is making them sick. There's other animals as well that can't vomit. I think rats can't, which is why rat poison is so effective, because they can't vomit. But that's how they throw up. So thank you, that's a very interesting question. Okay, so I've got time for one more. Now that I had loads more questions, I haven't got around to answering everyone's question, but I will probably save them for a future video. And of course, if you have any questions, you can stick them down in the comment section of this video, or you can find me on Twitter or join my Discord server and you can ask me there. Okay, so all the links will be in the description of this video and you can find out. So last question, this one's a really interesting one. Again, it's from Tea Time Science, who asks, why are frogs used as a model organism for scientific research? That's a really interesting question, but to answer it, I turned to Alice Godden on Twitter, who is a PhD student studying frogs, and she provided me with a really comprehensive answer, which I will read out to you, because I'm not going to be able to remember this whole thing, because I have a terrible memory. But yeah, it's really interesting. So frogs have been used in scientific research for many, many years. The big rise to scientific fame came in the 1950s. A particular species of frog called Xenopus, this is the African clawed frog, was used in development of pregnancy testing. Hospitals would have a laboratory with a few frogs in for this purpose. How does this work? Well, a female frog can be induced to lay its eggs by small hormone injection. In pregnant women's urine, there is an amount of this hormone, so if a small dose of this urine is injected into a frog, the next day there would be eggs in the frog tank, and the prognosis would be pregnancy. Nice one, Alice. Frog embryos are great because they are large compared to other animals' embryos, meaning we can see them on the bench, although to see them develop and grow in fine detail you'll need to use a microscope. Frogs also lay hundreds of eggs outside the mother, giving high numbers of embryos for research, rather than, say, a mouse where only 1 or 2 embryos may be given. Using frog embryos is also non-invasive, as the eggs are collected in a petri dish on the bench, and the adult animals are not harmed in this collection. The eggs are fertilised by IVF in the lab, and then we wait for the embryos to develop. We can control the rate of development by increasing or decreasing the incubator temperature they are in, as we were talking about earlier. This typically ranges from 18 to 23 degrees C. The cooler the incubator, the slower the rate of the development. By studying how cells and tissue develop in the first instance, we gain a better understanding of how to regenerate them. This is why many applications of the developmental biology research are in regenerative medicine. Knowing what makes a cell within an embryo turn into a particular type of cell, e.g. what makes a bone cell precursor turn into a bone, will help scientists program cells correctly when developing stem cell technology. This could be beneficial for certain therapies in the future, for instance in spinal cord trauma, where cells do not repair properly on their own. So thank you very much, Alice, for that. I really do appreciate you sending me that information. So anyway, that's all the questions we've got for you today. There were more that was asked, but I will save them for another video. So thank you everybody who sent in questions, and as I said, if you have any more questions that you want to know about frogs or about the process that we go through in this series, then do stick them down below or follow me on various other social media handles. Got Facebook as well, didn't mention that earlier. All the links will be in the description, and hopefully we'll have some more questions. Right, there'll be another video next week, because I do have something else I want to talk to you about in regards to how my tadpoles are getting on, but I don't want this video to go on too long, so I will save that for next week. So thank you everyone who sent in questions, and thank you very much for sticking to the end of this video. I really do appreciate it, and if you did enjoy it, please do let me know by leaving a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more frog related content, plus all the other wildlife stuff I do on the channel. Well, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.